At 6 in the morning in Hobart, before the sun has cleared the shoulder of Kunanyi, a fisherman named Nobody in Particular is already untying his boat at Constitution Dock, and the cold coming off the Derwent River is sharp enough to sting the backs of the hands. 240 kilometers of open, notoriously violent water, the Bass Strait, separate this island from the rest of Australia. And that gap is not a footnote here. It is the organizing fact of daily existence. Tasmania is a place that has built an entire identity out of distance. Distance from the mainland, distance from the rest of the world, distance that could have meant isolation and instead produced something closer to concentration. A place where things are made slowly, grown carefully, and lived in deliberately, because there is nowhere else to rush off to. The contradiction sits at the center of everything here. This is an island of convict origins and cutting-edge contemporary art, of hydroelectric dams and old-growth wilderness, of small towns where everyone still waves from their utes, and a capital city that hosts one of the strangest, darkest festivals on the planet. This is the story of how roughly 573,000 people build ordinary lives on a mountainous island at the very bottom of the world, and why, for most of them, nowhere else will do. The Tasmanian morning does not announce itself loudly. In Hobart's northern suburbs and in towns like New Norfolk or Sorell, people wake to a stillness that mainland Australians often describe as unsettling on their first visit. No traffic hum, no urgency. Breakfast tends to be practical: toast with Vegemite or local honey, a flat white from a suburban cafe rather than a chain, because Tasmanians are fiercely loyal to independent roasters. In Hobart, the day often bends around Salamanca Place, the row of sandstone warehouses built by convict labor in the 1830s that now houses galleries, bakeries, and offices, though its real transformation happens every Saturday morning when Salamanca Market spreads across the square, a ritual that has run continuously since 1972, drawing farmers, wood-turners, and fudge makers who know each other by name. Community here is built less around institutions and more around proximity and repetition: the same butcher, the same servo, the same faces at the football on a Saturday. Palawakani, the reconstructed language of Tasmania's Aboriginal people, has given back to the island the word Lutruwita, the name increasingly used alongside Tasmania itself, a quiet daily reminder that this land had a name and a people long before 1803. The pace of life is unhurried but not lazy. Tasmanians will tell you, half-joking, that everything happens on island time, a rhythm shaped by small populations, long distances between towns, and a climate that punishes anyone who tries to hurry a winter garden. Afternoons in smaller towns like Richmond or Ross often mean a walk past a colonial bridge or a church built 2 centuries ago, not as tourism, but as the simple geometry of getting from one errand to the next. What outsiders read as slowness, locals experience as attentiveness, noticing the tide, the frost line, the particular blue of the sky before a southerly change rolls in. Weekday mornings also carry their own quiet economy of favors: a neighbor collecting another's mail during a mainland trip, a lift offered to school without being asked twice. Because in towns where the nearest large supermarket might be 40 minutes away, mutual reliance is not sentimentality, it is logistics. And it is that same attentiveness, extended outward from the everyday into the symbolic, that shapes how Tasmanians understand who they are. Identity on this island is not singular, and pretending otherwise would flatten something real. There is the old convict-descended Tasmania, proud in a complicated way of ancestors who arrived in chains and built the sandstone buildings that still stand. There is the Palawa community, whose 9 nations once spread across the island they called Truwuna, and whose survival, after the devastation of the Black War and forced removal to Flinders Island in the 1830s, remains one of the most difficult and important threads in the island's story, marked today by continuing efforts at language revival and land return. There is a newer Tasmania of tree changers and artists drawn south by cheap land and dramatic light. What unifies these strands is less a single value than a shared relationship to the land itself, a fierce, sometimes contentious protectiveness over wilderness that has made Tasmania the site of some of Australia's most significant environmental battles, from the 1980s Franklin River Dam blockade onward. That relationship expresses itself loudest each June at Dark Mofo, the winter solstice festival built around fire, nudity, and unsettling contemporary art at Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art on the Derwent's Edge, an event that has become, improbably, one of the most talked about arts festivals in the country. At the opposite end of the calendar, Taste of Tasmania fills Hobart's waterfront every new year with stalls of local produce, timed to greet the yachts finishing the Sydney to Hobart race as they cross the line on the Derwent. And every second year, 10 days on the island scatters performances, exhibitions, and storytelling across the smallest towns, insisting that culture in Tasmania does not only belong to the capital. Religion sits quietly rather than loudly in this identity too. Census figures show a population roughly split between no religious affiliation and a mostly Anglican and Catholic Christian majority, a legacy of the island's British convict-era churches, but faith here rarely organizes daily life the way land and weather do. But to understand this culture fully, one has to understand what people actually do with their days, and that means turning to the island's work. Tasmania's economy is smaller than any other Australian state's, and it wears that scale differently than one might expect. Rather than a weakness, locals increasingly treat it as a kind of specialization. The state's gross state product reached roughly $42.82 billion in 2024 to 25, and GSP per capita climbed to about $74,374, a rate of per-person growth that in recent years has actually outpaced every other state in the country, even as the total economy remains the nation's smallest. Healthcare is the largest employer on the island, with around 48,778 people, close to 17% of the workforce, working in hospitals and aged care from Hobart to Burnie. Salmon farming, carried out largely by companies like Tassal and Huon Aquaculture in the pristine cold waters of the state's southeast and west coast, generated over $1.36 billion in value in 2024 and supports roughly 5,000 regional jobs, though the industry has also become a flashpoint, with environmental campaigners and scientists raising alarms over the impact of fish farms on sensitive waterways like Macquarie Harbour. In Hobart, the shipbuilder Incat has spent decades quietly becoming a world leader in high-speed aluminum catamarans, exporting vessels to ferry operators across the globe from a yard on the Derwent's Edge. Forestry and mining still employ communities on the rugged west coast in towns like Queenstown and Rosebery, where copper and zinc have been pulled from the earth for more than a century. Work culture here tends to resist the mainland's corporate intensity. Small businesses dominate. Employer and employee often know each other outside the workplace, and there remains a strong tradition of trade apprenticeship, particularly in boat building, furniture making from native timbers like Huon pine, and hospitality. Tourism itself has become an economic backbone in its own right, with well over 1 million interstate and international visitors arriving most years, a figure that occasionally outnumbers the resident population and forces small coastal towns to expand and contract seasonally around the industry that sustains them. But an economy built on food, timber, and tourism eventually leads back to the table, and it is at the table that Tasmania reveals itself most completely. Few places pack as much specific, provable food identity into so small a landmass. There is the scallop pie, a savory hand pie found in bakeries from Hobart to Devonport, its filling built on scallops harvested from the state's cold coastal waters. There are the oysters of Bruny Island, plucked from the channel and eaten standing at roadside stalls with nothing more than a squeeze of lemon. There is Pingana cheddar, made in the island's northeast, using methods and equipment largely unchanged since the 1890s, aged into a sharpness mainland cheeses rarely achieve. There is leatherwood honey, produced by bees that feed almost exclusively on the leatherwood tree found in Tasmania's temperate rainforests, giving it a perfume unlike any other honey in the country. And there is the fruit of the Huon Valley, cherries, apples, and berries that earned Tasmania its old nickname, the Apple Isle, grown in a climate cool enough to rival the great fruit-growing regions of Europe. Truffles, cultivated around Deloraine since the 1990s, have turned inland farms into unlikely exporters to French kitchens. Meals in Tasmania lean domestic. Dinner at home remains the norm on weeknights, often built around whatever came off a boat or out of a paddock that morning. But the Saturday market and the pub counter meal remain sacred communal rituals, the latter usually meaning a schnitzel or a piece of grilled ocean trout eaten at a wooden table beside people the publican has known for 30 years. The cuisine, in other words, is not a marketing slogan. It is a direct translation of the geography that surrounds it, of cold water, cool air, and volcanic soil. Even the island's whiskey, distilled by small producers like Sullivan's Cove using barley grown a short drive from the still, has begun winning international awards, proof that Tasmanian food and drink culture is no longer a regional curiosity, but a genuine export identity built from soil rather than slogan. And that geography, in its rawest form, is really where any honest account of Tasmania has to go next. The island's physical scale disguises its intensity. Southwest National Park and the wider Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area cover close to 1.58 million hectares, nearly a fifth of the entire state, protecting some of the last true temperate wilderness left on Earth. At its heart stands Mount Ossa, the island's highest peak at 1,617 meters, rising above Cradle Mountain Lake St. Clair National Park, where the 65-kilometer overland track draws hikers willing to walk for 6 days through button grass plains and ancient pencil pine forest. The Gordon and Franklin rivers cut through country so remote it became the site of Australia's most famous environmental protest in 1982, a blockade that ultimately stopped a dam and helped define the modern Australian conservation movement. On the east coast, Freycinet National Park's Wineglass Bay curls into water so clear it looks tropical despite the chill, while the Tasman Peninsula's Dolerite sea cliffs plunge hundreds of meters into the Southern Ocean. Locals do not experience this landscape as backdrop. They experience it as errand and obligation, a place to collect firewood, check crayfish pots, or simply clear the head after a hard week, and the seasons dictate mood as much as activity. A wet, dark winter that turns Hobart introspective and gives dark mofo its bite, followed by summers of long light in which entire towns seem to relocate to the water. Bushwalking, known locally simply as walking, is closer to a civic duty than a hobby, and sea kayaking around the Freycinet coastline or fishing for trout in the Highland Lakes fills weekends with a steadiness that outsiders often mistake for leisure, but locals understand as maintenance of self. Even the island's tallest trees carry their own record. The swamp gums of the southern forests rank among the tallest flowering plants on Earth, some exceeding 90 meters, a fact that turns an ordinary walk beneath the canopy into something closer to standing inside a cathedral built by nothing but time and rainfall. Moving through and living beside all of this inevitably requires infrastructure built for isolation rather than density. And that infrastructure shapes daily life in ways visitors rarely notice. Tasmania is the only Australian state with no passenger rail network at all, a fact that surprises most mainlanders and shapes almost every commute on the island. Instead, life runs on roads, the Midland Highway connecting Hobart and Launceston, the winding coastal routes threading fishing villages together, and on Metro Tasmania buses in the two main cities, along with a patchwork of smaller regional operators serving towns the size of a few thousand people. The true lifeline to the mainland is the Spirit of Tasmania, the overnight ferry service crossing Bass Strait between Devonport and Geelong, which for decades has carried not just tourists, but the freight, family visits, and even furniture that keep the island connected to the rest of the country. Its reliability, or occasional lack of it, is genuine dinner table conversation. Hobart itself moves at a scale almost nobody who has lived in a mainland capital finds intimidating. The Tasman Bridge across the Derwent is a genuine landmark and the site of a still-remembered 1975 collapse that closed the city's main river crossing for 2 years, a scar in civic memory that shaped how Hobart thinks about resilience and redundancy in its infrastructure to this day. Technology has arrived here on its own terms, satellite internet and improved broadband have allowed a small but growing wave of remote workers to relocate from Sydney and Melbourne, working mainland jobs from a shed overlooking the Huon River, blending old trades with new possibility. It is exactly that blend, old trade, new possibility, that defines the choice facing the island's young people most sharply of all. The University of Tasmania, headquartered in Hobart with satellite campuses in Launceston and Burnie, along with the vocational network of TASTAFE, form the backbone of the island's education system, offering strong programs in marine science and Antarctic studies that leverage Hobart's status as a global hub for polar research. But the numbers facing young Tasmanians are not gentle. National youth unemployment sat above 10% through early 2026, more than double the general rate, and Tasmania has consistently posted the weakest labor market indicators of any state, with underutilization, unemployment and underemployment combined, running close to 12%. For many young Tasmanians, this creates a familiar tension, the pull of Melbourne or Sydney with their salaries and scale against the pull of a place where you can afford a house, know your neighbors, and surf before work. Some leave for university or opportunity and never return. Others leave deliberately to gain experience before coming home, treating the mainland as a finishing school rather than a destination. Those who stay build identity around informal outdoor social life. Bonfires on beaches, share houses in Hobart's inner suburbs like North Hobart and West Hobart, a music and art scene that punches well above the island's population. Ambition and rootedness sit uneasily together here, but increasingly, remote work and a renewed state government push to lure back the Tasmanian diaspora, including targeted funding to help expatriate Tasmanians relocate home, are giving young people a third option that didn't exist a generation ago: build the ambitious life without leaving the island at all. As the workday winds down and that same generation heads home, the island shifts into an entirely different register. Evening in Tasmania arrives with a kind of held breath. In Hobart, the light off Kunanyi turns the water in the Derwent copper-colored before it disappears, and the city empties early. Restaurants along Elizabeth Street fill by 7, and by 10 most of the capital has gone quiet. Porch lights on, wood smoke drifting from chimneys in the cooler months because so many homes still burn it. In the smaller towns, evening means the pub, the single hub of a place like Strahan or Bothwell, where the same dozen or so regulars gather regardless of the night of the week. Along the coasts, fishermen bring boats in as the wind drops, and in the highlands, the temperature falls hard and fast enough that locals plan their whole day around beating the cold home. Even Hobart's late-night texture is modest by design, a scattering of small bars tucked into old warehouse laneways off Salamanca, rarely loud, rarely crowded past midnight, because most of the island still rises early regardless of the season. What defines Tasmania at night is not spectacle, but presence, a felt awareness of how close the wild actually is, how a 10-minute drive from almost any town leads to genuine darkness and genuine silence. That feeling, more than any single landmark, is what people mean when they try to explain why they live here. Not excitement, but a kind of grounded attention, the sense of being somewhere specific rather than anywhere at all. None of this is to say Tasmanian life is without real strain. Housing affordability, once the island's great selling point against the mainland, has eroded sharply as interstate buyers and a slow-growing population push against Hobart's tight rental market, and the state has run consecutive years of vacancy rates among the lowest in the country. Wages remain lower on average than the mainland, even as living costs, particularly the cost of shipping goods across Bass Strait, climb, a structural squeeze that hits young families and pensioners hardest. The salmon industry's environmental controversies, including fish mortality events linked to farm density in fragile waters like Macquarie Harbour, have split communities between those who depend on aquaculture jobs and those who see the industry as trading long-term wilderness for short-term export income. And the isolation that gives the island its character can, in winter especially, tip into genuine loneliness, particularly in the smaller West Coast towns where population decline has hollowed out services. And yet people stay and people return because what Tasmania offers in exchange is difficult to price. Clean air measured among the world's purest, a house with a garden within reach of an ordinary income in a way most Australian cities no longer allow, and a wilderness that begins, quite literally, at the edge of town. The trade-off is real, but so is the calculation that most Tasmanians have already made in its favor. A bet that space, quiet, and proximity to wilderness are worth more in the long run than the salary they might earn somewhere louder. That, in the end, is the whole shape of this island's story. A place defined by the water that separates it from everywhere else, and a people who have turned that separation into a kind of fluency. Fluency in silence, in seasons, in knowing a place completely because there was never anywhere else to look. The gap of Bass Strait that once made Tasmania feel like an afterthought to the rest of the country, a place the mainland circled on the map and rarely visited, has become, for the people who live here, the very reason the island works. Distance as discipline, isolation as intimacy. Every place on Earth negotiates a version of this same trade between the world's noise and a smaller, quieter claim on belonging. And Tasmania has simply made its choice more visible than most. In the end, this is a story less about an island than about the universal, quiet decision to stay somewhere long enough to actually know it. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending this time in Lutruwita with us. This channel exists to look past the postcard version of a place and actually sit with how people wake up, work, eat, and rest inside it. The real, unglamorous, remarkable texture of daily life around the world. If that's something you find yourself drawn to as well, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss where we go next. And if you've been to Tasmania, or if you live somewhere just as far from everywhere else, drop a comment and tell us what that distance feels like from where you stand. We read every one of them. We'll see you in the next video.